If I cut you tomorrow, no one would care. He giggled, loud enough that the interns heard and fake laughed like their jobs depended on it. Maybe they did. The junior VP, Brendan, a LinkedIn influencer with a hero complex, looked directly at me when he said it. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Just smiled. That tight-lipped, seen-it-all smirk I reserve for men who think power is volume. He liked jokes with a body count, apparently. And I was supposed to play along. I was the SOC2 lead, the named control officer responsible for proving we weren't playing hackathon with our clients' data. The audit was tomorrow. The board knew. Legal knew. Brendan apparently didn't, or didn't care. He'd cut 3 heads of departments in the last month alone under the name of agility. He called it corporate CrossFit. I called it reckless. But saying that out loud in this room would have been like lecturing toddlers on fire safety in a fireworks store. The worst part? I could feel the team watching me, not him. Me, waiting to see if I'd bite, raise my voice, cry maybe, give him something to justify the next round of realignment. But I've been doing this too long. When you're the last line between chaos and compliance, you don't shout, you document. Before we go on, I just want to say, if you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. It really helps our team keep stories like this going. And if you tap the like button, it tells the algorithm we're doing something right. All right. Back to Brendan's mouth-writing checks his badge couldn't cash. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk slow and silent, like a condemned woman who already knew the executioner's axe was dull. My calendar blinked with an all-day reminder. SOC2 audit. On-site tomorrow, 9 bar a.m. Right under it, a sticky note in my own handwriting. Exceptions must be signed by named officer. My title, my responsibility. Which meant everything he'd bulldozed in the last 4 weeks, the unapproved deploys, the midnight access changes, the incident logs that mysteriously never logged, were my problem, on paper, in ink. I opened the HR portal. There it was, in draft status, role consolidation plan. I was listed second. First was the proposed new owner of my responsibilities. TBD delegated authority. No name, no training logs, no compliance credentials. Just a placeholder for someone who'd say yes faster. I clicked over to the policy archive and opened the insurer's rider. 3rd paragraph. Bolded. Named SOC2 officer must remain unchanged during audit window unless written approval and formal designation are provided to insurer and auditors in advance. Brendan hadn't done that. He didn't even know he needed to, because arrogance and ignorance often share a cubicle, and Brendan had both feet up on the desk. So I did what I do best. I made a checklist. I pulled the logs. I printed the change orders. I collected Slack threads with his 1 a.m. green lights that bypassed approvals. I dug out the memo from the CEO, dated 11 months ago, officially naming me the company's SOC2 officer, signed in ink. And then I drafted one final letter, sealed, initialed, time-stamped, and dropped it in the black hard-shell briefcase I kept for client reviews and serious problems. This was both. By 6:32 the next morning, that briefcase was on the receptionist's desk. For the lead auditor only, I told her. Tamper tape wrapped around the clasps. My initials crossed the seam like blood over stitches. She asked what it was. I just smiled. Just the truth, I said, in exhibit format. Then I turned and walked away, still wearing the same calm expression I'd had in the meeting. But inside, I was wildfire. Brendan didn't streamline. He amputated, with a grin, with a Slack emoji, with phrases like, "We'll fix it in post," and "Don't be a blocker." That's how he justified pulling access reviews from quarterly to whenever someone complains, how he let temporary contractors keep admin credentials 6 weeks past their off-boarding dates, and how he signed off on a patch to production at 12:47 a.m. without change control, rollback planning, or, God forbid, documentation. I wasn't looped in. I wasn't even on the notification channel. The first I heard of it was when an engineer forwarded me a screenshot. Brendan's directive in all caps, time-stamped. "Just push it. We'll audit it later." That one nearly cracked a molar in my mouth. I started pulling thread, and once I started, I couldn't stop. Every skipped approval became a bullet point. Every unauthorized push became a flagged row. The access logs lit up like a Christmas tree. Contractors ghosted months ago were still logging into systems with data residency requirements our entire business model was built on. Brendan had called it velocity. I called it a compliance time bomb with the fuse already lit. Resentment sharpened into something functional, purposeful. My hands moved faster. The anger in my chest flattened into structure. Folder trees, time-stamped exports, cross-referenced exception reports. I wasn't just protecting my job, I was protecting our customers from the mess Brendan left in his wake. Because no one in that office seemed to understand that when you sign the SOC2 line, you're not signing as an employee, you're signing as a firewall. You are the thing between trust and liability, the human airbag. I pulled up the HR draft again. Role consolidation, governance, and controls. My name in red, replaced with a dotted line report to interim delegate TBD. There was no record of any training, no delegation plan filed with legal, no update to the control register. They were setting me up to take the fall, softly, without making it look like a firing. They thought if they made the pivot look strategic, the auditors wouldn't ask questions. They were wrong. The auditors always ask, and I'd seen this playbook before. I opened the insurer rider again. The section was clear as glass. During the audit period, the named officer must remain in position unless a formal designation and insurer approval are filed in advance. Not optional, not negotiable, not followed. That's when the briefcase came out from under my desk. I hadn't used it in years. It still had the faded label from our last site-to-site client review, back when the company still treated governance like a value, not a barrier. I wiped the dust off and laid out the contents one by one like a surgeon preparing an operating tray. Exhibit A, my appointment memo, official, signed by the CEO, filed with both legal and risk. Exhibit B, the full list of access discrepancies, annotated with change timestamps and lack of approvals. Exhibit C, the screenshot of Brendan's 12:47 a.m. Slack directive paired with the production deployed diff log. Exhibit D, exception reports with missing signatures. Exhibit E, the original HR draft for role consolidation. Exhibit F, the insurer rider. Exhibit G, email thread with legal where I flagged concerns. Exhibit H, the sealed letter from counsel confirming my current appointment and the violation in progress. Each document got printed, signed on the back with initials, and inserted into a labeled divider. I attached a cover sheet. For auditor review only, do not discard. Chain of custody required. Then I added tamper the evident tape to the latches and signed across it in red ink. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't drama. It was defense. Because if Brendan wanted to gut controls and pretend it was innovation, fine. Let him giggle his way through the kickoff meeting. But I wasn't going to jail or to the unemployment line because some startup frat boy got promoted too fast and thought policy was just a suggestion. I looked at the briefcase. It looked heavier now, like it knew what it was about to carry. It wasn't just paper. It was the truth. And I just made sure it had an exhibit number. The lobby smelled like burnt coffee and lemon-scented cover-up, the official perfume of early corporate disasters. I got there before sunrise, the parking lot still glistening from a storm that passed through sometime after midnight. Brendan wouldn't arrive for another hour. Neither would the auditors. That was the point. I walked in wearing the same blazer I'd worn the day I was officially named SOC2 officer. It still had the pen mark on the inside hem from where legal handed me the memo to sign. Exhibit A. I'd already made a copy and highlighted the clause. This designation is valid through any compliance audit unless amended in writing and filed with board consent. Brendan never read it. He wouldn't have understood it if he had. The receptionist blinked when she saw me. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was the look on my face. Tight, unshakable, already done with the day before it started. Morning, I said. This needs to go to the audit lead directly, not the team, not their assistant. No one but the lead. It contains live documentation. She nodded and reached for it. I didn't let go. There's tamper-evident tape on both latches. My initials cross the seam. It's been logged, signed, time-stamped. Chain of custody matters even now. Her hand retracted slightly. Good. I set the briefcase down with both hands and slid over a sheet that read, received by and time. Date. Signature. She took it seriously after that. Should I put it in the safe? She asked. Not necessary. Just hand it to the lead when she checks in. I turned to leave. She cleared her throat. Do you want a delivery receipt when it's handed over? I smiled. A real one this time. That'd be appreciated. Outside, the sky was barely pink, the kind of pastel calm that makes you forget the storm ever happened. But I hadn't forgotten. I was still carrying it in my spine. Steel-edged calm. The kind you get before a root canal or a confession. There's something sacred about the moment just before everything changes, when you've already made the choice and gravity just hasn't caught up yet. On my drive back, I passed Brendan's spot in the executive row. Empty. He'd show up around 8:45 armed with a calendar invite labeled Audit Kickoff, a slideshow about agility in risk environments, and that empty smirk that makes interns overlaugh and directors overcompensate. He'd have no idea that the most important conversation of the day had already started without him, and that I wasn't even in the room when it would detonate. Back at my desk, I cleared every file off my desktop that wasn't necessary for answering audit questions. Just the essentials. Control register, user access logs, change management diffs, and the original signed PDF of Exhibit A. I didn't need to say much today. I just needed to be accurate. My Slack pinged. A calendar reminder auto-fired. Audit kickoff, DW exec team, 9 God AM, Conf RMA. I didn't RSVP. I wasn't required to attend that one. Because this time, I didn't need to defend myself with words. I'd already handed over the blade. Truth wrapped in documentation. Brendan was walking into a room where every shortcut he took had a name, a date, and a digital fingerprint. And for once, I wouldn't be the one explaining anything. That job now belonged to the exhibits. Brendan strutted into conference room A like he was hosting a TED Talk instead of an external audit. He'd even printed branded folders for the audit team, labeled Efficiency Through Innovation. I saw one from across the table and nearly laughed. That's how I knew I could keep my mouth shut today. When someone's already building their own noose out of laminated buzzwords, all you have to do is hold the stool steady. The audit lead, Marcy, wasn't new. You could tell from the way she flipped through Brendan's executive summary without even pretending to read it. She had a pen clipped sideways to her collar and a laptop that looked like it had seen war. She didn't do small talk. She asked for logs. Brendan launched into his presentation anyway. We've implemented a series of streamlining initiatives to eliminate friction across key access points, he said, like he'd swallowed a white paper whole. Our philosophy is agility first, but within risk-aware frameworks. Marcy raised one eyebrow. That sounds nice. Can I see the access review reports for Q2? He blinked. Just one beat too long. Well, we've shifted to a more responsive cadence, less about scheduled reviews, more about real-time accountability. Interesting, she said flatly. How do you document that? He gestured to his tech lead, who pulled up a dashboard filled with colorful graphs and no actual timestamps. Marcy didn't even look at it. What about change control? I'll need all approvals for production deployments over the past 6 weeks. Also, your exception waivers. Brendan hesitated again. Some of those were handled verbally for speed, but all within understood parameters. She paused her typing. Verbal approvals? Only in urgent cases, mission-critical updates, I gave direct go-ahead. Marcy's expression didn't move, but her fingers did, clicking into the folder she'd received that morning. Exhibit C. I could see the title on her screen from where I sat. Slack screenshot, 1 to 13 a.m. directive. She turned her laptop and showed it to the room. There it was, in pixelated shame. Brendan's message in the Thardag release channel. Ship it. No one cares. Timestamp. 1:13 a.m. Recipient. DevOps. Lead. Context. Critical patch to customer data routing. Brendan cleared his throat. That was hyperbole, obviously. You meant what you typed, Marcy said, not even looking up. Was this change documented in your control logs? The tech lead looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. No, ma'am. And the waiver? Brendan opened his mouth, but she was already typing again. I sat there in silence, not smug, not gloating, just present. My hands folded, my laptop open to the policy page that defined verbal authorization as an exception requiring documentation within 24 hours. Nothing had been filed. Marcy glanced at me finally. Ms. Taylor, were you notified of this change? No, I said, calm as a priest. And as the named SOC2 officer, I would have needed to sign off per our internal policy. She nodded and scrolled down to the next page of Exhibit C. Highlighted in red was the very section I'd just referenced. Brendan didn't even look at it. He just sat there, letting the air drain out of his presence. Marcy tapped the table lightly with her pen. I'm going to need Exhibit F from the packet. Termination and delegation rules. I'd like to confirm chain of command and any delegation that might have occurred prior to today. I leaned forward slightly. That would have been in the sealed briefcase. Reception confirmed delivery this morning. Marcy already had it. She held up the binder from the case and flipped to the tabbed section marked F. This'll do. Give me 10 minutes to verify. Brendan tried to rally. Let's not lose sight of the progress we've made. But no one was looking at him anymore. Not the tech lead, not the auditors, and not me, because no amount of corporate theater was going to change what the documents said. And the documents were starting to talk. Exhibit F wasn't a smoking gun. It was a notarized wrecking ball. Marcy opened it like it was any other binder, but when she saw the title page, she slowed. Top sheet, designation of SOC2 officer. Beneath it, my name, my title, and the date the CEO signed the memo, 11 months ago with validity through the audit window. There were 2 signatures, his and mine. No addendum, no override, no delegation filed. She didn't speak at first, just underlined a sentence with her finger and pushed the page forward slightly like she wanted everyone to absorb it on their own. The room was silent except for Brendan's pen clicking. Over and over. I'd like clarification, Marcy said calmly. Is this designation still in effect? I answered because no one else could. Yes, it has not been amended, replaced, or retracted. Brendan leaned forward, hands steepled like he was negotiating peace in the Middle East. We've made some internal role adjustments, realignment for efficiency. Marcy looked at him with the same expression you give someone trying to microwave a fork. Any reassignment of control ownership during an active audit must be formally delegated, documented, and communicated to all stakeholders, including auditors and insurers, she said. Was that done? Brendan hesitated. We intended to. HR had a plan. Marcy raised an eyebrow. Intended to isn't policy, it's speculation. The room felt smaller. I stayed silent, but my breath finally left my lungs without catching halfway. Not because I'd won, this wasn't a game. Because someone finally said out loud what I'd been screaming into Word docs and policy PDFs for months. She flipped to the next page. HR email thread printed and stapled. Subject line, SOC2 role consolidation draft. One line stood out, highlighted in yellow. We'll finalize delegation language post-audit, interim coverage TBD. Marcy read it twice. Then again, out loud, slowly. Interim coverage TBD, she repeated. So no formal delegation, no recorded training, no insurer notification, no approval from the current officer. Brendan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. We were in process. Process doesn't qualify under the continuity clause, she snapped. You don't swap out the brake pedal while the car's on the highway. I could have kissed her. She reached into the exhibit binder and pulled the next sheet. A printout of the company policy page stating exactly that. Any change to the named officer during a SOC2 audit is a reportable event, requiring written notice to the board and to our insurer. She tapped it twice, then set her pen down and looked directly at Brendan. Who authorized this termination? The words hit like a cold slap. Brendan's mouth worked uselessly. Around the room, no one breathed. The tech lead had gone pale. Someone at the far end of the table actually put their hand over their mouth. Even the intern, who usually had her AirPods half in, was locked in. I didn't move. I didn't smirk. I didn't blink. Because I hadn't come for revenge. I'd come for the truth, to say something louder than Brendan ever could. And right now, it was screaming. It didn't take long. Once the phrase reportable event left Marcy's mouth, it was like someone had pulled the fire alarm, except quieter and far more expensive. Legal showed up first, whispering in clipped sentences behind the glass wall. Then compliance. Then, within 15 minutes, 2 more names popped into the waiting Zoom queue. Our insurer's senior compliance officer and the VP of risk from our largest client. Both were dialing in from different time zones. Neither looked amused. "Before we proceed," Marcy said, folding her hands calmly, "you should be aware that this room is now under active documentation review. Anything said will be included in the audit record." Brendan cleared his throat. "This seems premature." The insurer cut in, voice flat and deeply uninterested in decorum. "We received notice from your audit lead regarding a potential control failure tied to termination without continuity documentation. Is that accurate?" No one answered. "Ms. Taylor," the insurer continued, "are you currently the designated SOC2 officer per your last filed designation?" "Yes," I said. "Signed by the CEO last fiscal year. No formal delegation has been filed or approved since. And have you signed off on any interim changes to production access, control ownership, or exception waivers in the last 30 days?" "No." The silence stretched like wire pulled too tight. The VP from our biggest client leaned forward on screen. "We have a continuity clause in our MSA that requires written notice of any change to the named officer responsible for controls. Was that filed?" Marcy responded before Brendan could bluff again. "Exhibit H covers the MSA clause. There is no delegate on file, no notice was issued, and the termination attempt was undocumented." The client exhaled hard. "Then, until continuity is confirmed by the original officer or a board-approved alternate, we're halting all pending environment changes, integration updates, and contract renewals, effective immediately." Brendan made a strangled noise like he was trying to protest without actually saying words. No one filled the space for him. I stayed still, cold steady. I didn't gloat. I just let the facts speak. The insurer spoke next. "We'll be issuing a risk flag on your policy. Coverage will remain provisional until a full review is completed. Recommend you notify your board." Brendan tried again. "This was a miscommunication, a temporary oversight. We've had internal transitions." Marcy held up a hand like a traffic cop. "You don't transition governance. You designate it, in writing." Then she looked at me. "Ms. Taylor, please bring your full documentation and briefcase to the next session. The board has requested an emergency review." I nodded once. "Understood." The call ended. The room stayed frozen. Brendan sat back like someone had just drained the color from the air around him. His voice, so loud yesterday, was nowhere now. No one made eye contact with him. Not even the intern. I stood and quietly packed my laptop. The briefcase sat beside me on the floor like a silent witness. I reached down, latched it shut, and felt the weight of it settle into my hand. No one stopped me as I walked out. Because there are moments when power doesn't yell, it doesn't threaten, it doesn't giggle, it just brings receipts. And now it had a boardroom waiting. The boardroom was quiet in that particular way rich people do silence. Leather chairs, chilled air, and the kind of hush that makes you regret your own heartbeat. I walked in last, briefcase in hand, flanked by Marcy and our outside counsel. Brendan was already there, seated far from the center. No laptop, no entourage, just a bottle of water with the label half peeled like it was trying to escape the room too. The chairperson didn't ask me to sit, just nodded once, then gestured toward the screen where Marcy had already queued up the exhibits. One by one, she walked them through the paper trail, Exhibit A through F, skipping the jargon, highlighting the damage, access violations, waiver gaps, unapproved terminations. Her voice never rose above neutral. Facts, dates, timestamps. It felt more like reading a coroner's report than a meeting. Then she opened the screenshot folder. On the screen, my desktop appeared. Folder labeled Audit Readiness Internal Use. Inside it, a series of screenshots, each one a quiet bomb. The first was Brendan's Slack message, bright white text on a dark background. "Ship it. No one cares." Timestamped, unambiguous, circled in red. Then another, a Slack DM from him to the HR director. "Cut her before the audit. I'll handle the fallout." This one was captioned, "Cut him," because the recipient had apparently forwarded it with the wrong pronoun, and I had both versions. Gasps came like distant breaks. Marcy didn't speak. She didn't have to. The next slide was an email from me, sent 6 weeks ago. Subject line, concern, access review backlog and untracked deploys. I'd flagged the exact issues that had now ballooned into this audit catastrophe. I'd warned them. No one had responded. Next slide. The CEO's own memo from 11 months back, scanned in full color. Title, Designation of Control Ownership Protections. His words, not mine. No terminations of governance role owners during SOC2 or other audits without board review and insurer notification. Dated, signed, filed, ignored. He stared at the screen now like he barely recognized his own signature, but it was there, and it was in Exhibit G. The chairperson finally leaned forward, voice low but sharp. Brendan, you were aware of this policy? Brendan started with, I may have misunderstood, but never finished. The CFO cut in. You signed the HR routing slip to terminate a control officer 3 days before an audit. You gave verbal approval for a production push at 1:13 a.m. without documentation. You bypassed risk controls and then spun it as efficiency. Brendan's face looked like it had aged a decade in an hour. Then the chairperson turned to me. Ms. Taylor, what would you require to restore full control and ensure audit continuity? I opened the briefcase slowly. No rush. This wasn't performance. It was surgery. I pulled out the binder I'd prepared that morning. Exhibit I, labeled Stabilization Proposals. I didn't look at Brendan. I wasn't here for that. I laid the binder flat and flipped to the first page. 5 terms, I said. Simple, enforceable, non-negotiable. I could see their eyes scanning the first bolded line. No one interrupted, not even legal, because this wasn't about policy anymore. It was about survival. And they finally understood who'd been keeping the wheels from flying off while Brendan played CEO cosplay in marketing jackets. This wasn't revenge. This was rescue. And I was the only one who came prepared to perform it. I didn't ask for silence, but I got it. The kind that hums in your ears and makes your own voice feel too loud when you finally speak. I flipped open the binder, slid the terms across the table, and laid out what I was offering, not as a compromise, but as a perimeter. This wasn't about negotiation. This was about stitching up the artery before we bled out on the audit floor. Term 1, I began. The SOC2 function operates independently. No dotted lines, no executive override. I report to the board, not to operational leadership. The chairperson nodded without hesitation. Brendan shifted, but no one looked in his direction. Term 2, mandatory training for all executives on control continuity, audit protocol, and incident reporting. Minimum 8 hours annually. Verified. I saw a flicker of hesitation from legal, but they said nothing. The insurer's risk rep had made it very clear earlier. Education gaps were liability gaps. Term 3, I said, locking eyes with no one in particular. No emergency changes to production systems or controls without my written approval or that of a formally designated trained delegate. No Slack messages. No after-hours cowboy deployments. The CTO, seated at the far end of the room, winced visibly. But again, no protest. Term 4. A formal delegate is to be named, documented, and trained prior to any planned absence or transition of control. That file must be logged, notarized, and submitted to legal and the insurer before it's active. The CEO leaned forward, folding his hands like he was about to say something profound. Instead, he just nodded, quietly, almost guiltily. And term 5, I said, slow and steady. HR may not initiate changes to the employment status, title, or reporting structure of any designated control owner during an active audit period without a board vote and direct insurer notification. I closed the binder. These aren't suggestions. They're baseline protections. Without them, we're not audit ready. We're not even operationally secure. There was a pause. Long, thick, real. Then the general counsel, who hadn't said a word since I walked in, slid a manila folder across the table toward me. Inside, an unsigned amendment. Title, Continuity Rider, Governance Controls Protocol. I flipped through the pages, pre-drafted, dated 2 weeks ago. So someone upstairs had seen this coming. Maybe not Brendan's recklessness in full bloom, but the risk it posed. They hadn't stopped him, but they'd quietly prepared for the possibility that someone would. Me. The chairperson cleared her throat. We'll adopt the amendment by board resolution now. Your terms will be codified. The insurer's flag will be lifted when you complete your control attestation. Will you sign? I paused. Not yet. Marcy glanced over at me, then nodded slightly. She understood. There's still one problem, I said, turning my gaze toward the one person who hadn't spoken since the screenshots hit the wall. Brendan looked up like a child caught pocketing cash from the register. Before I sign anything, I said, I want him to formally retract every verbal approval he issued during the audit window. In writing, I want it logged, countersigned, and submitted as a corrective action to the audit record. Brendan opened his mouth. I held up a finger. No explanations, no spin, just accountability. The board didn't object. The chairperson simply said, Mr. Hayes, please prepare the statement. You'll sign it before the session ends. Brendan swallowed something bitter and nodded. I turned back to the table, pulled a pen from my briefcase, and held it loosely in my fingers. Because when you fight for control in a place addicted to chaos, you don't win with speeches or status. You win with terms. Terms that stop bleeding. Terms that put locks on doors. Terms that remind the company what its spine feels like. And now they were finally ready to feel it. Before we close, Marcy said, standing with the authority of someone who's done this too many times to care about anyone's feelings, there's one more question that must be addressed for the audit file. She looked straight at Brendan, then scanned the room like she wanted to make sure everyone heard it exactly the same way. Who authorized this termination? Silence. The kind that makes your bones feel louder than your thoughts. Brendan didn't even try this time. He just stared at the grain in the table like he might find a trap door under his seat. Marcy waited a full beat longer, then nodded toward legal. The general counsel slid a single-page corrective action form across the table toward Brendan. A statement sat at the top in bold. This document acknowledges that the termination of the SOC2 officer during an active audit was unauthorized, and that any perceived delegation was informal and unapproved. He picked up the pen. Slowly, hands shaking in that way you only see when someone realizes the grown-ups are no longer backing their play. He signed. Marcy countersigned it. Then she looked at me. You're clear to complete the attestation. The board's resolution is live. Your role has been reinstated, reporting directly to this committee. The delegate is trained and listed. We'll note that continuity has been restored. I nodded once, opened my binder, and flipped to the final page, the SOC2 attestation form. My name, the controls, the timeline. I signed it with the same red pen I'd used to initial the temper tape. A closed loop, no ceremony, just ink and pressure. Within minutes, the customer's VP dialed back in. Pause lifted, he said. Contracts resume today. The insurer sent confirmation of risk note removal 10 minutes later. Even their message was brief. Continuity verified. Coverage stable. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was stillness. The kind that settles in when the adrenaline finally burns off, and the only thing left is a quiet body doing its job. The chairperson addressed the room. Brendan Hayes will retain title but lose access to change control systems and headcount planning. Ms. Taylor's role is now board level. Compliance override belongs to her office moving forward. I closed the binder, closed the briefcase. No more exhibits, no more warnings. Brendan tried to speak as I stood. I didn't stop. He'd said enough in emojis and 1 a.m. Slack commands. He'd spent all his credibility chasing a shortcut, and I'd let the road catch him. As I reached the door, I set the briefcase on the conference table one last time. Empty now, lighter than it had been all week. I looked back just once. Treat controls like parachutes, I said. You don't notice them until you're falling. And then I walked out. No applause, no pats on the back, just the click of the door and the silence that follows when the giggling finally stops.